challenge number 2, coming up again mainly from CISO and CSO. They feel there are current silos that they work within, which is the security and the networking. And this silo approach is no longer serving them, as it creates performance, operational, and security gaps that keep highering the risk that they need to address and make it super hard for them to coordinate everything across their infrastructure. Basically, they're asking, we almost feel like we need to compromise between security for performance or performance for security. How are we solving for that?
Yeah, I think that depending on the size of the company, so very large companies are still very much siloed. There's this security team and the networking team and the infrastructure team, and they basically build all those things separately. Even networking the infrastructure, and then they layer security on. It creates gaps. It also creates inefficiencies in the operations piece. And so, our view is that networking and security should be converging together. And so SD-WAN and firewalling and routing and switching and all those things need to come together alongside all the security components. Once you do that, you have a much more efficient operation, and I see suddenly the CISO and the CIO teams working together to build out things like secure SD-WAN, also implementing things like zero trust inside there. So more and more functionality that comes together so you can operationally build it, and it stops gaps appearing inside your edges.
Which is part of the challenge that a lot of SOC team addresses, the need to constantly coordinate between different functions. And we know it also from user experience. We see more and more systems coming in to allow you to monitor user experience from the beginning all the way to the application, what used to be in silos.
Yeah, and I think that's very important because in our digital world today, that user experience is very important, uptime, things like latency. And so the ability to measure that user experience from the endpoint, the user, through the network, into the application is very important. And we think what's also important, I hear sometimes maybe some of the cloud cybersecurity vendors say, well, we just need an endpoint and we just need something in the cloud. And everything in between is kind of irrelevant, I don't care. Well, it's very important for that digital experience. And so not only do you need to measure from the endpoint to the Wi-Fi, to the SD-WAN, to the cloud, but you also need to be able to look at it closely. Let's say, for example, I'm experiencing some issues with a particular application. Is it the Wi-Fi? Is it the network? Is it the workstation itself? And so being able to identify those pieces and zoom in and fix it is just as important as measuring the experience itself.
Yes, and there are more conversation around conversion of IoT and OT. So those used to be also separate systems. A lot of the OT environment is still dark environment, they're not connected, but the team are expected to monitor them in a coordinated way because attacks can appear in many of those systems and then transition to lateral movement.
Yeah, well, I think there is a difference between operational technologies and IoT. We're seeing more threats, ransomware specifically, because it can shut down infrastructure in the OT environments because they've allowed external access, remote access. Because of COVID, because of supply chain, they're allowing access. And so we're seeing a lot more activity inside the OT environments where they're trying to make sure there's microsegmentation or firewalling or visibility or NAC, all those things, because it's becoming a big risk for them. And so the ability to understand the IoT and OT environments is very important going forward.
And it's an architectural conversation. So a lot of our customers come to us and they reevaluate the entire architecture and not just solve it through one solution.
Well, I think that's happening, across everything. It's, yeah, let me just solve this problem and move to the next. No, let me architect or put a blueprint in place for the next 5 years and then work backwards on how I'm going to get there.